Hey, I'm Khalila McCoy, and this is the podcast where we create safe spaces for the truths we often keep tucked away. This is where we rise. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you are joining me today for this important conversation. My guest, Earnest James, is going to be talking about his experience with suicidal ideation, a topic that is real, heavy, and far more common than many of us realize. I'll be honest with you, before starting this podcast, suicidal ideation wasn't a term that I had heard of often. I know people whose lives have been impacted by losing someone to suicide, but I had never had someone personally tell me they were considering ending their life. As you know, these episodes are pre recorded, and what I've learned is that this topic comes up more than I ever expected. Not just in the conversations that you hear or you will hear, but often after I stop recording and the guest feels safe enough to share the parts that they've carried quietly. And it truly breaks my heart to know how many people reach a point where life is so heavy that they can't see another way out. Ernest is someone who found himself in that place. He reached a moment where he questioned whether he wanted to continue living, but thankfully, he found a reason to stay. Today, he's a podcaster and a mental health advocate who uses his voice to help others hold on, press forward, and realize the value in their own lives. He shares his story and his mission with such honesty and strength, and he truly embodies what this show is all about: creating safe spaces, naming the vulnerable truths, listening louder, and choosing to rise. While this is a heavy topic, don't reach for your tissues just yet. Ernest is going to use an acronym, FUN, to help us understand how to get through this difficult time. Let's listen in. Ernest, how are you today?
I am good. I am good. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I'm so glad to have you on the show. I've checked out some of your content. You and I have been talking before we hit record. And I know you have a lot of great things to say, and you just have a great personality and so fun already. So I'm excited to kind of dive into our conversation. But before we do, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
First of all, my name is Earnest James. And again, I want to say thank you for having me because, I would say as a podcaster myself, it's always good to be on this side of the mic when all I got to do is talk. You know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
I love that. But I am Ernest James. I am a mental health advocate. I am a speaker, a podcaster, and an author. But at my core, I'm just a person that loves people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And my mission is to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. And so that's kind of my mission. And I kind of got my missions from my own life, my own life struggles and things that I was going through at the beginning of my journey a couple years ago. And that kind of started everything with the podcast. And um, I have two podcasts that I'm currently running right now, which
Mm-hmm.
is the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. That podcast is on 200 and something episodes at
That's
this point.
awesome.
And then I have a podcast called Girl Dad Discussions because I am a girl dad. My daughter is my only biological child. She's 22. She'll be 23 this year.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so just podcasting and speaking and you know, doing workshops and things of that nature just to help people. So that's
Mm-hmm.
me in a nutshell.
Yeah. We're going to talk about one of the more serious topics today about the idea of taking your own life. And this is something that I've seen you talk about on your show. I know you've done talks about that. Why have you chosen to share about this topic, and why do you want to reach out to people about this?
So I actually did my first TEDx talk about it. I want to say it was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But because I lived through it, right, and
Okay.
I made it through it. You know what I'm saying? Because when you start to have suicidal ideations, that's a dark space that
Yeah.
you're in that you really don't see no way out of. and a lot of people don't make it out of that space. And
Mhm.
so being a person that made it out and being a man that made it out,
Mhm.
um, knowing it's a couple of reasons why I talk about it so much now. Number one, being a man that made it out. Number two, knowing that men don't talk about it,
Mhm.
or don't talk about our struggles as a whole, but definitely don't talk about those things. And then I'm a bricklayer by trade, right?
Okay.
And so the construction industry, what I found out afterwards, and I started doing some research myself about it, is the construction industry is in within the top 10 industries of suicides. And
Wow, I had no
so
idea.
yeah, and I didn't either. And I've been
Yeah.
a bricklayer for 20 something years too. You know what I'm saying?
What
So
is the
I didn't
reason
know that
behind
either.
that?
So I think it's a couple reasons. I think
Okay.
it's a couple reasons. One, because I think mainly because it's a male dominated um career path,
Mhm.
right? And so when you're on a job site and you're in or any space, but definitely on a job site where it's 90% men, 95% men, nobody want to show weakness. Everybody
Okay.
wants to, hold
Oh,
safe face
yeah.
for one another and be the strong man. And, it takes a high level of vulnerability to admit some of the things that you're dealing with, some of the things that you're going through. And
Mhm.
because we're always trying to save face, we don't want to admit it. We don't want to talk about it. And so
Right.
we suffer in silence until we get to the point where we can't take it anymore. And then, somebody takes their own life,
Mhm.
And so I think that's one of the main reasons, why it's so high in the industry.
So go back a little bit and tell us about your story. You said you lived through it and you talked about it being a dark time.
Yeah.
So, do you remember the time like before the darkness kind of set in? Where were you in your life?
Oh, definitely, definitely. So I would say if you met me some years ago, you would have met me at a time when I was living the American dream, right?
Okay.
I had my dream job, I had a truck, I had a motorcycle, we had bought our first house. Me and my wife at the time, she had her car that she liked. She had a good job, I had a good job. We were in our early 20s, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? We had just had my daughter, so my daughter was born. We were everything was going good,
Living good.
at
Yeah.
that time. Then things started to change, right? So the country went through a recession,
Mhm.
and I'm in the construction field. So when the things slow down, of course, construction slows down. So that started to affect our home,
Mhm.
financially, and that puts a lot of stress on the marriage, especially, number one, we were young
Right.
and we were early in our marriage, a couple years in, but still early in our marriage,
Mhm.
when we started having those issues. Um, and then just other things started compounding at the same time. So now you got, you know, uh, things are tight with the money and the finances part.
Right.
Then things start happening between me and my wife and I, and so now we're not in definitely in a good space. And
Mhm.
then her mom died,
Oh,
and my wife was the only child, so it
okay.
was always just her and her mom. And her mom, me and her mom had a very great relationship. My mom was a beautiful person. But we had our own relationship. Like we would go out together, we would go out to dinner and, just hang
Oh,
out
that's
together,
nice.
just the two of us,
Right.
And so when she died, that took a toll on me and my wife.
Mhm.
It definitely took a toll on her because again, she was the only child, and I always had been just her and her mom. And even then, they worked together. So even the last couple years, they
Okay.
wrote the work together and all of those things. So it was hard on her as well.
Mhm.
And so dealing with that, and then 3 years after she died, then my mom died.
Hmm.
So you got that, divorce, the death of my mother-in-law, then the death of my mom, which
Right.
added to depression. And
Yes.
so everything at that time really just felt like everything was falling apart,
Mhm.
and it really wasn't nothing I can do. It was like everything is falling apart. And so that's when you start getting into that that deep space, that deep hole, and you're trying to figure out like, what can I do? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
and then when you realize there's nothing you can do, you know what I mean? Like, I couldn't make the jobs come back. I couldn't fix my marriage at that point. It was a done deal. Couldn't bring my mother-in-law back. Couldn't bring my mom back. So it was like there was nothing I could do to change my situation. And so when you get into that space, that's when you start having the suicide ideations because it's like, like what's the use?
Why
Or
am I
you start
here?
feeling, yeah, you start feeling hopeless and helpless because there's nothing you can do. And then you start having those thoughts of, you know what, things might be better if I wasn't here. Because
Mhm.
by that time I had separated from my wife. And so I was staying with one of my sisters and, again, work had slowed down. So I was working a little bit, but not making a
Mhm.
lot of money. Just a whole lot of things going on. And it was just like now I feel like I'm a burden to my family now. And,
Yeah.
all of those things started kicking in. And so I started having those suicidal ideations.
You talked about, like, as men, you keep that in. Did you tell anybody how you were feeling? Did you voice, like, the desperation of, like, I need to figure out where my life is going?
No, I didn't. And that's another reason why I talk about it so much now because when I started my podcast and I started talking about it on my podcast, I got
Mhm.
8 siblings, right? I got
Oh,
eight
wow.
siblings, 5 sisters. After one of my podcasts that I did that I was talking about it, my sister called me, my baby sister called me, and
Mhm.
she was like, "How is it you went through all of that
And you
and none
didn't
of us know?
know.
Like it's eight
Yes.
of us, like none of
Right.
us know, And I was like, because we're not having the conversations, you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like even when we check on each other and we say how you doing, we really don't ask like how you know what I'm saying? You say how you
Right.
doing? You say, oh, I'm
I'm
good, whatever.
fine,
We
yeah.
don't, yeah, and we don't follow it up like no, but how you really doing?
Mhm.
To really press like no, I really want to know and make sure you're okay.
Right.
And so which is something I do now, but at that time I wasn't doing it, and they weren't doing it either.
Right.
And so I'm suffering in silence like so
Mhm.
many other people. And so um but what happened, the turning point was, again, I had my daughter. My
Mhm.
daughter's my only biological child. She probably was like 7 around this time. She was young, and we were at the house. We were at the house one day, and she's playing in the front yard. And I got the sprinklers, and I got the little kiddie pool out, and she's running in the sprinklers, just playing. And I'm sitting on the porch watching her, and she's playing in the water, running back and forth, and then she stops and she runs over to me on the porch. So when she gets to me, she starts crying.
Hmm.
And I said, "Why are you crying? Like nothing happened."
Right.
And she said, "I miss my grandmothers." Because at this
Mm.
time both of her grandmothers had died.
Right.
And it was in that moment that I kind of had a epiphany, like my daughter, as young as she is, still is aware enough to notice that both of her grandmothers is
Are
not here.
gone. Right.
Even in the midst of her playing, like I said, she was having fun and just enjoying herself, for that thought to come to her at that time.
Mhm.
And I was like, what will happen to her if I'm not here? Because my daughter was a daddy's girl. She's still a daddy's girl. But
Mhm.
I'm like, what will happen to her if I'm not here? If she lose me too, if she's already feeling this way about her grandmothers, who we spent a lot more time with her grandmother on her mother's side, more so than my mom.
Mhm.
But even with that, she still recognized that both of them were not there.
Right.
And so I'm like, what would happen to her if me, who she spends every day with, you know what I'm
For
saying?
suddenly to be
What would happen to
gone.
her if I'm not
Yeah.
here? Yeah. And so that was the catalyst that kind of said, you know what, if for no other reason, I got to stay here for her. And
Oh,
so that
good.
was the thought that kind of made me start, kind of turning my mind around like, all right, I got to figure this thing out,
Mhm.
and then with some friends and family and different things, I was able to come out of that. And I actually shared, or when I do share how I came out of it, I always say I had fun with it, right? And so
Okay.
fun is an acronym, and it stands for focus, unite, and normalize. So
Okay.
when I was focusing on myself, right, I couldn't help myself because when I was focusing on myself, everything that I was looking at, I couldn't change.
Mhm.
Again, I couldn't change my divorce. I couldn't change my mom coming back. I couldn't bring my mother-in-law back. None of that. And so when I had the situation with my daughter, that changed my focus. So I took the
Right.
focus on myself and I started to focus on her. Right. And so everything became, I got to stay here to make sure she's good, you
Mhm.
know. And so I had this conversation with a therapist, and the therapist was like, "Well, Ernest, we actually teach people to focus on themselves, and so they can work on, whatever." And I always say, "Look, I'm not a therapist, so I
Mhm.
can't tell you what's right or what's wrong. I can tell you what
Tell you
worked for
what
me."
worked for
You
me,
know.
right.
So I always tell people whether you have to focus on yourself or focus on, a person or purpose that you
Mhm.
care about to give you that, focus on those things and put your energy there in order to help you to motivate you to stay and hang on for another day, then that's what you do. So whatever you got
Right.
to focus on that, right?
Yes.
And so the U stands for unite. Unite with like-minded people. And
Mm.
so after my mom passed, I started taking bereavement. I joined a bereavement support group, and I went there, and I did my time there, which was like a couple weeks as far as my sessions were. But I
Mhm.
loved it so much that I stayed there, and I became a volunteer, and I volunteered for over a year.
Wow.
And then when I left there and I started a nonprofit called
Mhm.
Ann Christine Charities. Ann is after my mom. Christine was my mother-in-law. So I
Okay.
named it Ann Christine Charities. And what I did was to bring bereavement support to our community,
Mhm.
because even while I was there, um, during the time I was volunteering with the bereavement support, there was only one other Black family that came through there,
Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
so I was a minister at the time too, and so I'm like, I know it's not because we're not dying, because I'm a minister at the church. We having funerals all the time. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, I know it's not because we don't need the support. It may be just because we don't know about it, or maybe it
Right.
wasn't offered or whatever. And so I started the nonprofit to, bring it to the community and bring it, make awareness about it. Um, so that came with the you again, to unite with like-minded people, right? So
Mhm.
I joined bereavement that bereavement support group because we were all there because of loss.
Right.
Some of the people were there had lost children, some of the people had lost spouses, some of the people like myself had lost parents, so we always there for different reasons, but or should maybe say different people, but for the same reason. We all were dealing with loss,
Right.
and so when you find your, like-minded people, you're able to communicate. They're able to
Like they
understand
really
you and all of
understand.
those
Yeah.
things. Yeah, yeah. So I would say again, the F stands for focus, the U stands for unite, and then the N stands for normalize. So one
Okay.
of the terms that I learned when I was in bereavement is the new normal.
Mhm.
And what the new normal stands for is things will never be the way that it was, right? It'll
Right.
never be the same. Or it will never be quote unquote normal as it was. But now you have a new normal,
Mhm.
So my new normal now was I may not, I can't call my mom, just because I feel like it. You know what I mean? I
Right.
can't go out for dinner with my mother-in-law anymore, all, different things like that. But this is my new normal. So if I
Mhm.
accept that this is the new normal, then I can find the happiness and, the life and the joy that still exists in this normal.
Right.
There is definitely still some some loss that I have to deal with, but
Mhm.
even in the midst of that loss, there is still some memories, there's still some joy, there's still some connections, that is still vibrant in this new normal. And so when
Right.
we accept that new normal, then we can accept our losses, but also accept the joy and the life that we still have to live.
Yeah, it's like you find a new purpose.
Yes, it's an acronym which is fun, and it's focus, unite, and normalize. So that's how I kind of came out of it.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about those three, focusing on yourself or someone else, you picked your daughter was your focus, the uniting with a group of people, and then normalizing. Which one of those do you feel like was the hardest for you to kind of work through, or you might still be working through?
Um, it probably would be the normalizing,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're dealing with grief, there's a thing that they call the grief wheel, right? And
Okay.
it kind of dissects. If you think of a pie, and so you have a circular pie, and when you cut pie, you cut it so it's got the little triangle shaped pieces,
Right.
right? So when you think of a wheel, think of the grief wheel like that, and each slice is a different emotion that you deal with when you're dealing with your grief, right? It might be
Mm-hmm.
anger, it might be sadness, it might be, joy sometimes, so it's just an array of emotions. And the thing with the grief wheel is the fact that it is a wheel, so it never
Right.
stops turning,
Yeah.
right? And so even as you go along, once you if you think of a hamster, right? A hamster, and he jumps on his hamster wheel and
Mm-hmm.
he's running as fast as he can, and is turning. So if he slows down, it slows down. But
Yes.
as long as he on it, it never stops moving. So that's kind of how grief is. Once you enter grief, it's that same way. It never stops rolling.
Mm-hmm.
So it don't matter how long is you've been grieving. It don't matter how long ago the loss may have been. It only takes the right day, the right sound, the right smell, you know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? That whatever that thing is that can trigger that memory of that loss,
Right.
right? And then it depends on how much you've processed and how much you've kind of healed with it, not
Right.
from it, but with it. It depends on how you react to it, right?
Yeah.
So I can tell you now, I can talk about my mom like we're having this conversation right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I can talk about my mom, and I'm okay, you
Right.
know. But then there are some days. I'll tell you one thing that happened right after my mom passed here in Chicago. I'm in the Chicagoland area. There was a big scandal at this cemetery that's out here, where they were stacking bodies. They were doing all kind of crazy
Mm.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of my family members, including my grandmother, is buried in that cemetery. And so when it
Um.
hit the news and it was all on the news and everything, and I'm watching, I'm like, man, this is crazy. And I'm like, let
Mm-hmm.
me call my mama and tell mom, hey, mom, you need to go check on, grandma grave and things of that nature. And I go to call her, and I'm like, oh wait, she's not here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so it just those little things,
Those
as
moments.
you heal, you kind of forget because
Uh-huh.
you kind of going on your day to day, and then it'll just be like one little thing that can trigger it, like a
Mm-hmm.
memory or anything, or just a thought or something like that, and then just like, oh, right, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Um, but I'm in a space now where I don't get triggered like that. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying?
Yeah.
I'm in a healthy space, so I can have conversations and things, and it doesn't, But there are times when just could be like her birthday or Mother's Day or something like that, where then you start thinking about it, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, I probably wouldn't say I cry, but it definitely have its
It
moments
brings
where
you some
some
sadness.
sadness, yeah,
Yeah.
So
You talked about like healing and starting to forget. And obviously you have kind of moved away from that idea of taking your life. So,
exactly.
do you ever look back and remember how you felt at that time when you were seriously considering taking your life? And then now at this point, how do you look at that person? Are you like, what were you thinking? Like, you should have talked, you should have done this? Or is it just more like a kind of like a sorrow for who you were then?
Well, you know what? I look at it from not sorrow, but I look at it as a learning space, right? Because I know how I felt at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that there are people that's feeling the same way that I felt.
Yes.
And so I begin to look at it as in, why didn't I say something? Or
Mhm.
what were the reasons why, you know what I mean? And so
Mhm.
I look at it as a learning space because now I'm going to say something.
Right.
That's why I talk about it so much now because I want other people to be comfortable talking about it. And
Mhm.
I want to also provide the space for other people to talk about it. Right.
Yes.
And so I think about all the things I was going through. And so when I think about, having the conversation with people and they're feeling depressed or whatever, and, I just ask them, how you doing? And then give
Mhm.
people a chance to talk. Because a lot of times people just want to talk. They just
Right.
want somebody to talk to, somebody to give them the invitation to let them know it's okay. Right. And so I
Right.
talked about, number one, as men, not having a conversation like that, right? And then being in the construction field is another reason why we don't necessarily talk about it, right?
Mhm.
So this was a couple months ago. I was on a job and it was me and a laborer that I was working with. Generally, we work in a group, so it's like a
Okay.
group of us. But
Right.
this particular day, it was just two of us working on this project together. So it was just the two of us, me and the laborer. And I had worked around him, but it never worked directly with him before.
Mhm.
And so it's just the two of us this day. And so we're talking while we're working. And he's like, well, what did you do over the weekend? And that past weekend, I had a speaking engagement. So I had went and spoke and everything. And so I was like, yeah, I had a speaking engagement and, talking about it. And he was like, oh, you're a speaker? I said, yeah, I'm a speaker. I got a podcast, and he was like, well, what is your podcast about? And so as I was telling him what the podcast is about, I said, well, my guest and I talk about topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives.
Mhm.
So I talk about things that I've been through: divorce, depression, suicidal ideations, things like that. And for things that I haven't been through, then I bring on other, speakers or specialists to talk about those things, all in hopes to leave the audience with some tips and tools so that if they're dealing with something like that, that they have some tools to help them to get through.
Right.
And so when I said that, he was like, "Oh, you talk about suicide ideation." I said, "Yeah." So I, told him my story or whatever. So when I told him my story, it opened up that space for him to share his story.
Mm.
And so he started talking to me about the fact that he had had suicidal ideations before as well.
Okay.
And not only had he had them before, but his father had suicidal ideations before. But to the point that his father actually took his own life,
Mm.
and he was the one that found his father's body.
That's
And
so sad.
so we're having this conversation. We probably talked about, you know, uh, half an hour or so, and then
Mhm.
it was time for us to go to break. So we go to break, and we come back. When we come back, he comes up to me. He says, "Ernest, you know what?" He said, "You're a cool guy to talk to because the conversation we just had, I never told anybody." you
Wow.
know? And so that's why I'm passionate about it. That's why
Yes.
I talk about it. Because how long had he been holding that in? You know what
Right.
I'm saying? How long had he been probably still suffering just with the thoughts and the memories because he can't share it with anybody? You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And so by me being vulnerable and saying this is my story and telling my story and being open about it, it opened up the door to give him an opportunity to share. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Mhm.
so, just by him being having the opportunity to share, who knows how much that might have lifted that off of his back,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know. So that's why I'm so vocal about it now. That's why I talk about it. I'm really open about it,
Mhm.
and I take in consideration again, you know, I take in consideration the space that I was in and try to make sure that I'm aware of those symptoms. You know what I mean? So when I see people that's in that space, when I see people that might be going through a divorce, when I see people who may have lost somebody, you know,
Mhm.
just yesterday actually, I was talking to another gentleman on the job, and he was talking about some losses that he had.
Mhm.
And he just kind of, was taking that moment just to talk about some different things.
Right.
And he talks a lot, you know what I'm saying? And so a lot of people on the job be like, "Oh man, why you talking to that guy? Like he don't shut up,"
Right.
But one of the things I realized is a lot of times people just want to be heard,
Yes, they
you know,
do.
and they
I
just
agree.
want, people that talk a lot sometimes is holding a lot in. So they're
Mhm.
talking a lot, but they're not really talking about things that matter. So
Right.
when you give them opportunity to talk about things that matter, then it takes on a different type of conversation. And
Yes.
so he was talking about, some losses that he had of losing his grandfather and losing his aunt and losing, like two of his best friends. One of them, I think he said one of them overdosed and one of them was murdered,
Mm.
and so just having them again, just giving people the space to say how they feel and having a listening ear and giving them someone to talk to, you
Yeah.
know, you never know how much of a difference that makes in somebody else's life, which is
Right.
why I love podcasting because I love having these conversations, because
Yes.
when we are able to have the conversation, then those who may not be uh may not have the opportunity to have the conversation, they at least
Mhm.
get to hear the conversation and they
Right.
help them process it even in their mind
Yes.
where they may be having a conversation with us. I mean, we can't hear them, but they're like telling us their story, like, yeah, I understand. And I dealt with this, you know what I mean? But it just opens up the door for that healing to take place because
Yeah.
now people have a safe space to admit how they feel and admit that what they're dealing with. And once they admit it, then they all can look for the help that they need, and
Yes.
not feel so isolated that they don't want to even ask for help.
Mhm. I agree. You're making my heart so happy as you talk about this because this is honestly what my podcast is all about. It's just being heard, hearing a story, understanding that when you hear that you are not alone, somebody else is going through it, there's something on the other side of it, or somebody might still be walking through it, but you can continue and you can make it through. So this makes me so excited just hearing that you are a person who's allowing people to have that space because I think it's so important. I love that, as a man, you're doing that. I love that as a black man, you're doing that. We know in the black community, that space is not always available because there is so
Mhm.
much trauma and hurt and pain there. And just, the mental health understanding, again, because of the situations that a lot of people are in, it doesn't happen. So this just makes me so proud and so happy that, to see you doing that and just being so open. I do have a question for you, and I know everybody's a little bit different, but when you have somebody who does share such a deep story with you, like what would your suggestion be? Because some people I feel like shy away when someone says something serious because they don't know how to respond or they feel uncomfortable themselves. How do you
Mhm.
get past that in yourself? Obviously, honoring who you are, but also give that person room to share what they need to say.
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is realize that, especially in those moments, it's not about us,
Mm
right? And I think when we start thinking about how uncomfortable we are, then we start being that roadblock that people, which becomes one of the reasons why people don't share.
hmm. Right.
So if I take a moment to think about how uncomfortable I am about hearing someone else's story, how uncomfortable must they be living it? You know what
Right.
I'm saying?
Wow.
And so if I'm able to think that in a moment, like, let me put myself aside real quick, because if they're number one even willing to have the conversation,
Mm hmm.
then I need to make sure that I'm willing to at least listen. And that's all you have to do. Because like I
Yeah.
said, a lot of times people just want to listen, they just want somebody to listen, and sympathize with what they're dealing with, and even if you could just say, I don't have the answers,
Mm hmm.
but I'm here to listen. I'm here to sit with you even after you share it, and now you just want to sit in silence and kind of gather yourself. I'm here to sit in the silence with you.
Right.
So I think that the biggest part is us just being there to be a listening ear and to walk alongside them.
Mm hmm.
Don't try to fix it for them. Don't try to, make them feel bad about it, but allow them to have their experience that they're living in. And if they are feeling some type of way that you think they might harm themselves, again, that's when you say, okay, let me walk with you in this. Let's look for the resources together.
Mm hmm.
Let's make the phone call together to, I think it's 988. Let's make that phone call together, or let's go, to the hospital, let's wherever, let's go talk to someone, just like just be there with them. And that within itself, again, just taking ourselves out of the way to
Yes.
allow them to have that space and have that moment.
Were you always this compassionate of a person, or do you feel like it's because of this experience it's really opened you up?
I always was. I
Okay.
always was. Grew up in the church early, in my earlier years. I'm a PK, and for those that don't know what that means, that's pastor's
Oh,
kid or
yeah,
preacher's
same
kid.
here.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I know
Okay.
that life.
So, yeah. So you grow up
Yes.
serving. And so we
Mhm.
would go to the nursing homes and rehabilitation centers and all of that just started really young at a young age. And so it was something we constantly did.
Yes.
And one of the things I always share, my mom, even before she became a pastor, she always was like a people person, and people loved her.
Mhm.
And she had this prayer that she would always pray. And she would pray and she would say, God, give me a love for your people. And so growing up and
It's a
hearing
beautiful
her
prayer.
say that prayer, I took that prayer on myself. And I said,
Mhm.
God, give me a love for your people. And he has done that. And I just truly have a heart for people to try to help people, any way that I can. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, so I pretty much always been compassionate, a compassionate person. Um, then I always have the tools to help, but I have a few more tools now and some life experience and things of that nature that makes me um valuable, should I say, to help others. So yeah.
As you walk this journey of helping people, what's something that's either surprised you about either how people react to you or just surprised you about something you've learned about yourself?
That's a good one. That's a good one. I think so. One thing that I do know, um, I'm actually a very quiet person, right?
Oh,
I'm
could have
very quiet.
fooled me.
Right, and that's why I said that, right? So I'm an introvert, right?
Okay.
So when I get behind the mic or I get on the podcast or something like that, then the other person takes over. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? So then I'm just like, oh yeah, I can talk. But if you met me just like on a regular day, I'm actually pretty quiet.
Okay.
So people are surprised of that. Like even on the job, they're like, "How you got a podcast and you hardly say two words?" You know what I'm saying? I'm like, "Well, it depends on what you want to talk about." You know what I mean?
Right. That's
Um,
true.
so, so I think people that know me or are getting to know me, should I say, and come to know me as my introverted self when
Mhm.
they find out, the things that I do and especially the topics that I talk about and how often I talk about it, they're kind of surprised about that.
Yeah.
Just like, well, that they don't see it. It's kind of one thing you don't see it coming. Like, really? This guy got a podcast? I'm like, yeah, 200 and some episodes. You know what I'm saying?
All right. So as we wrap up today, if the listener only took away one thing from what you said today, what do you feel like you really want them to understand and to know?
Number one, you're not alone, right? And so the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. So there's nothing that you're going through that somebody else haven't went through, that somebody else isn't currently going through the same thing as you're going through it. And when you're done and made it to the other side, there's still going to be somebody else that starts to go through the same thing that you went through. So we're not alone in our journeys. Um, there may be specifics that change. There may be circumstances that's different. Um, but there is a group of people that understand what you're going through, that some has lived through what you're going through, or some just may have a loved one that may be have gone through what you're going through, so they understand. um but I think that's the main thing, that we realize that we're not alone, and because we're not alone, you don't have to be afraid to ask for help. You don't have to be afraid or ashamed to admit that you need help, you know. And, sometimes it takes a little extra courage, to voice it and to put it out there that, you know what, I'm in a space that I need someone to walk along with me, to walk alongside with me. Um, but when you do, I believe that God will send the right person to walk with you to get you through that time period. And so that's what I want people to walk away with. Just know that you're not alone. Know that there's people out there that's willing to help you, and you don't have to be ashamed to ask for help.
For the listeners who have loved hearing you talk today and want to see more of your content, remind us, how can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me living out my mission. Again, my mission is to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to
Mm-hmm.
deal with your problems, to heal from your pain, and to fulfill your purpose. And so everything I do is kind of around that mission. So you can find me on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, which is the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network. On that network, you will find the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And also one of the things that I just started is my school community on the school platform, and it's
Yeah.
called Deal to Heal for Living.
Okay.
And on that platform, I teach workshops. I have resources and workshops to help us prioritize our emotional health and our mental health. And so I
Mm-hmm.
have workshops on finding your purpose and overcoming your grief and overcoming failure and things of that nature that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and kind of helping us work through some of those things. Um, and so, yeah, so you can find me definitely on the podcast. On Instagram, you can look up Deal to Heal podcast, or just look me up as Earnest James. On Facebook, I'm Earnest James. On TikTok, I think I'm Deal to Heal podcast. But for the main part, I would say um, just go to YouTube, the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network. And if you guys are interested in having me to come out to be a speaker at your um, school or organization or something like that, you
Yeah.
can go to my website, ernestjamesspeakslife.com,
Nice.
and you'll find more information there.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Ernest. And it's been truly a pleasure talking to you. And like I said, I'm so grateful for what you do and what you share with others.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
For anyone listening who has ever felt overwhelmed by what you're carrying, I hope you heard something today that reminds you that your story isn't over, that there is space for your pain and space for your healing, that you deserve support, connection, and people who will walk with you through the hardest moments. Choosing life is not a one time decision, it is daily. So, Ernest, I want to thank you for reminding us that even in the darkest seasons, there is still possibility and still purpose. If you are listening and struggling, I hope you know that you don't have to carry this alone. Please do not carry this alone. You deserve to be here and you deserve all the care that you need. I am so happy that you're here and you are a wonderful part of this community. If you or someone you know needs support in this area, you can always call 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across the United States and its territories, and it's available in over 240 languages. And that includes services for those who are deaf or hearing impaired. And through this, you get to talk with trained crisis counselors who will provide the support you need. Again, that's 988. Thank you for joining in today. I'd love to connect with you and hear what you got from this conversation, so don't forget to hit me up. And more than ever, I hope this episode reminds you to take a moment to listen a little louder to yourself, to the people you love, and to the things that connect us in ways we sometimes forget to notice. I'll meet you back here next time. See ya, bye.